Hi, my name is Ryan Anderson with Google Cloud here in Portland. You're listening to the Digital Native Podcast. Today on the show, we have Kelsey Hightower. Kelsey, thanks for joining.
Hey, so this is the first episode, so
I got to set up what it is.
Yeah, we gotta make some noise on that. I mean, I'm gonna claim that this is the first episode. So if he doesn't put this out first, I'm still first. So
we're gonna see how it goes, and then I'll decide if we want to put it out first. So, quick introduction, Kelsey. I know you describe yourself as a technologist with Google Cloud. Technically, your title is Community Developer Advocate. Can you share with us a bit more about what that is and what your day-to-day is like?
Yes, I work in a cloud advocacy group, and we like to keep it as technical as possible. So different companies think about advocacy different. Some people lean towards marketing. At Google, we're on the engineering ladder, so this is why I still hack on libraries or, build prototypes. So if you see me give a live demo of something, or you see me talking about something on Twitter, there's a chance I have my hands in the code still. The biggest part, though, is that we have to raise awareness, of course, of our products and services, but we also have to have a feedback loop to all the people out there that are buying our services, right? So you can definitely buy BigQuery, you can buy Kubernetes, but at the same time, there is best practices on how you use those things. And not every customer fits into the cookie cutter way of doing things. So then we have to come out and do those deep dives on the whiteboards and improve the product to make sure it works for them.
No, that's awesome. So to get started, and I guess, Kelsey, if you haven't heard of you, I'd recommend becoming one of your 91,000 plus Twitter followers. Tell us a bit more about your background getting started. I think it's interesting that you're here in Portland, Oregon metro area. Not a lot of people know that. Tell a little bit about your background. How'd you get into tech, and your story?
Yeah, it's a very long story, but I get the short of it is like a lot of people, self-taught, no college, grew up in Long Beach, California, spent the other half of my life in Atlanta, so from the South. And during that time period, right, you're graduating from high school, you're deciding what to do. I decided college wasn't the route for me, so I just bought a book from Barnes and Noble. Yes, that was still a thing. And I think I bought like a free BSD book. And you start to learn all of this stuff like, wow, look at this technology, right? Like a lot of people are making a lot of noise about it. And it turns out you can buy a few books, get a few certifications, and now you're in the tech world. And as I progress through the tech world, I mean, there's a whole life of Kelsey as the entrepreneur with the computer store. Fast forward to jumping into, like I would probably say like your more traditional job, first job at Google in the data center. And I've gone through financial organizations, open source companies, and now I found myself here at Google and specifically in the Pacific Northwest, thanks to working at Puppet Labs a number of years ago.
No, and that's great. And that's how you ended up in Portland, was just through Puppet?
Yeah, I was working remotely in Atlanta when I was at Puppet Labs. And, of course, they trick you. They always invite you out when the weather is nice, right? So you come out, it's like, oh my God, this is like California weather at half the cost. Like I'm moving to Portland. And you get here and like the next 2 months are great. And you're like, hey, what the hell is the rain? Where's the sun? And it turns out like, the weather isn't great all year round, but it turns out the people are. So we stuck around.
Yeah, no, that's great. So, I mean, talking about the people in kind of Portland, in your role, you talk to a lot of different companies, some of the larger companies in the world. In your opinion, what's unique, what's interesting about Portland, our market, some of the startups and software companies we have here in town?
I mean, everyone likes to believe that there's something unique about their approach to technology, but the truth is it's probably not. And that's fair enough, right? So I think, it's funny. Oregon in general reminds me a lot of the South, right? There's a lot of traditional businesses, whether it's in like agriculture and farming or textiles. So there's a lot of traditional businesses here, and some of them translate well to technology. I think Nike is like a marquee standout there. You think about some of these companies who are blending the two worlds, and I think the opportunity for Portland or the things that look very fascinating is when that happens, right? When you take something that is considered like a traditional industry and you mix in the technology, and when you do it just right, I think that's where you start to get the amazing things from. And honestly, that's where I think most states or cities should lean into. Your unique thing outside of technology, what happens when you intermix technology? Does that thing get better? And if so, I think that's what you lean into.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting here. We have all the retail companies. We have some big shoe companies here historically who've been here a long time. And starting to see the startup community that's spawning out of that has been really interesting. We have a long-time standing kind of B2B software community here in town, which is interesting. But yeah, it's an interesting landscape. I think what's exciting too about Portland is VC community 2018. We raised $470 million, set the record. most money poured into the VC in the ecosystem ever. 2019, we beat that in October, and we've nearly doubled it. So I mean, it's interesting to see other markets, the VC community in general, start to take notice and start to invest in what's going on here in town. So I guess looking more towards your role, you talk to a lot of companies. Tell us about the kind of companies that you meet with. What's top of mind, and what are some of the trends that you're seeing?
To be honest, I meet with everything, right? From the Fortune 50s through what we call the digital natives, right? Like the title of this podcast, where there are people who are born in the cloud, are less fearful of using managed services and SaaS offerings. Like their focus is really just getting their business out there, getting features to stay competitive. So they're going to leverage all the technology they can handle. But then you also have companies that have been around for 50 to 100 years, and their situation is slightly different. They got existing investments that they have to carry forward. They just can't turn that stuff off. And what you typically see is not all 100-year-old companies are hesitant to adopt technology. You'll have pockets within those companies who are actually pushing the bar because they actually have more use cases than the digital natives would. So you actually see them pushing the bar in places you thought they wouldn't. And it all really comes down to, your people for the most part. If you have a good experienced set of folks who can take those risks and back them up, you'll see companies actually go out and try things a little bit earlier than waiting for the rest of the industry to give an approval on. So it really just comes down to the people. So I think the big themes now is, look, the buzz is dying down on all of this Docker, containers, cloud native, digital transformation. People have been transforming for like 10 years and you just start to get lost in it. So now what we're starting to see is people really got this stuff in production. And the next thing is like, how do you secure this wild, wild west? You have all of this stuff out there. You got random teams adopting and buying random stuff. How do you keep it all in check? How do you make sure that you kind of keep it secure and know what's going on?
Yeah, and you speak to the talent and security as being challenges. What are some of the other challenges you're seeing that leaders and engineering leaders are up against?
I mean, what's priority, right? Do you just adopt Kubernetes because it's out, right? Like, hey, I have something that works. Do I just go that way because that's where the industry's going? So you have this fear of missing out. You have your competitors looking at things like BigQuery and starting to offer features and services that you just don't have. And you have to make this challenge. Do you try to build the same capabilities? Like, you say, hey, I want to avoid maybe lock in or relying too much on a vendor, even if they have great technology. So you're at this standstill now. Do I build it from the ground up? Do I go open source and fill in the gaps? Or do I take this ready to go solution and hopefully I can develop a long-term partnership where that won't be a threat to my business going forward? That's a big challenge for anyone that's making decisions right now.
No, it is, and there's so much information out there. It's like, how do you prioritize? How do you, where are you getting your intel? And with that, there's going to be mistakes. That's how we learn. Read a quote by Satya Nadella, said, to look in the rearview mirror and think what led to success somehow can lead to new successes. It doesn't. History will come back and bite you in the ass, is what he says.
Yeah, very true.
Yeah, and I think I see a lot of that. You see a lot of that. What are some of the other mistakes that you think folks are making right now?
So you'll have a mistake like, I want to buy technology that's going to last me 10 years, right? We bought this thing 10 years ago. We believe we got a lot of value out of it. We didn't really maintain it very well. So you hear people call it things like legacy, and then they have to try to do the next migration, right? You don't maintain these systems. So you want to abandon ship on those. And then when you look forward, you're like, all right, let's just find the next thing that will last another 10, 20 years, like you're buying a house. And technology just doesn't move that way at all. You don't get to buy a piece of technology and assume that it's going to be good fit for the next 10 years because things will change, right? When mobile came out, a lot of companies did not see that company coming at all. And they just got caught off guard. And all the systems they bought 2 or 3 years prior were just not a good fit to deal with that whole new landscape of clients coming in, banging on your APIs in a way that you just couldn't handle. So I think you just got to make sure that you don't make your technology purchasing decisions the way you used to make them 10 years ago.
Yeah, and I love that analogy. But I mean, you look at like a house or cars, and they don't make houses like they did 10 years ago. I mean, it's a different game now that people are playing and a different way to buy them.
Yeah, exactly.
So, so blatant sales pitch. I should have started by saying this, but my role is new business development with Google Cloud and strategic partnerships. So Google Cloud just came out a couple of days ago, remained atop the list of the highest paying certifications for 2020. It actually extended its lead pretty significantly. The Google Professional Cloud Architect is paying a rate of $175,000. The second place is the AWS Certified Solutions Architect at $149,000. Why do you think the market is starting to pay attention to this skill set? What are some of the unique differentiators about Google Cloud?
So in like all fairness, when there's more of something, usually the cost demand goes down. There's probably more certified Amazon people than Google people. So whenever you have that situation, then the price goes down because the talent pool tends to be bigger.
Yeah, but you're
There's
not supposed to
another
say that on my podcast. No, I'm just
No, you,
kidding.
you got to say it because people aren't stupid, right? Like people read between the lines. You got to make sure you give them food for thought. But there's another element there too, though. The other element is that, just to be fair, like if you look at a lot of the modern technologies people speak of, there's a lot of Google-led innovation there, like this whole container push. Yes, Docker really brought it to the masses, but I remember, Google putting out white papers about how they were leveraging containers in this Kubernetes-like style with Borg. The same thing with MapReduce back in the day that led to things like big data and Hadoop and things you're seeing with BigQuery, the way we rethought data analytics and made that available to the world. So a lot of times when people have skills that are rooted in that foundation, a lot of companies know that they're kind of getting that Google quality, that Google led thought leadership around how to adopt technology. And a lot of our platforms embody that technology in the product. So when people know how to use BigQuery, you know that they understand how to separate compute from storage. They know how to think about solving these, terabyte, petabyte scale of situations that they have hands-on experience with. So I think this is another factor that leads into, if we get someone that has learned these modern stacks, they're going to bring some new ideas to the table versus certifying that they know how to use the tools that we already have and know about.
No, I think it's interesting. And, if you look back a few years, if I'm a digital native company, I'm coming to market, I had one option to build my product on top of. And, we're seeing that folks are starting to get excited about, I have more options now and I can start to make a strategic choice based on what's best for what I'm trying to achieve in my business.
Yeah, we've done a good job resonating with people who are paying attention to things like gRPC, Golang, our approach to things, and it's done in this open source way. So I think that's another big factor. Since a lot of our products are founded or foundations are in open source, that's a lot of directions that most companies are going. So even though that certificate says, Google Cloud certified XYZ, they know that this person probably has skills that's transferable either on-prem or in the multi-cloud situation because it's rooted in that open source nature.
No, that's great. And we have some good examples here in town, companies like Urban Airship, Lytix, Discover.org, who are doing some really interesting things. So that kind of leads to, you mentioned on-prem, talking about different providers. One of the common asks we get is multi-cloud. I mean, tell us about multi-cloud. What's Google doing there? How should I be thinking about it? If I'm a startup in town, if I'm a Fortune 500 company, how should I be thinking about multi-cloud? Where does it make sense? Where does it maybe not make sense?
We hear multi-cloud so much. Sometimes I just have to rub my head a little bit because I get the discussion, right? So if you go into a data center, you'll see networking equipment from Juniper, Cisco. You'll see hardware from Dell, HP, IBM. You'll see all of these various vendors because a lot of customers are accustomed to buying best of breed, whether it's based on their preferences or how they like things that fit together or based on their past experiences. So this has always been the norm for most things that people buy. You buy the best of breed, you mix and match. Now, when it comes to the cloud, I think the reason why you still hear people talk about multi-cloud is because, honestly, in my mind, there's like maybe two big factors. There's one, the networking. Usually cloud providers are split between physical locations and buildings. That means if you use service A from cloud provider and service B from a different cloud provider, then usually you have this big network to overcome, and there's usually a cost associated. So now a lot of times we're trying to mitigate those. The other one is the security story. There's different ways of securing these services, and they also sometimes are incompatible with each other, right? The way IAM works in one provider works differently in another. So this brings up that conversation. I want to go multi-cloud. If this was a data center, I would buy my database from one company and buy my compute from another, and it wouldn't be a big deal. If you try to do that in the cloud, now you start to get into some of those data gravity issues we just outlined. So what you're trying to see now is people try to normalize as many layers of that stack as they can. So if I come up with a workflow for deploying applications, I can adopt that same workflow in multiple environments, whether it's AWS or GCP. And there are some layers where you can do that, and there's some layers where you can't. So I think most people's multi-cloud strategy is the same that they have in the data center. All they want to do is adopt best of breed. If you like what BigQuery is doing and you happen to use S3, if there was no network between those two things, you would just say, hey, BigQuery, here's my S3 bucket. Let me query data that's in there. Since that's not the case, you have to have all of these decisions around networking and all those other things that go with bridging the gap between those two.
No, that's great. So shifting the conversation a little bit more, personally to you and what you're learning about. I think what's interesting about your background is you actually go in and try, a lot of these different products. What do you think for you is something that you've changed your opinion on, that maybe you had a strong opinion on over the last couple of years, that you came out thinking, man, I was wrong on that, or I have a different opinion coming out?
I would probably say like JavaScript. I just don't like JavaScript. But the truth is, JavaScript is everywhere. So it's one of those programming ecosystems that's so big. It's not about whether you like it or not. It's here. It's going to be here for a very long time. And you really just need to embrace it, because there's so many things that if you want to do end to end, JavaScript's going to eventually come up and be a thing that you're going to have to learn, period, full stop. I think the other thing is serverless. I really, really thought that serverless is going to be more dominant than it is in 2020. Because, I mean, in 2018, 2017, I mean, people were just like serverless, 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 serverless. And I'm like, damn, I'm missing the boat, man. Like, hey, I got to get up. I got to step up my game. And internally, I contributed to things like Cloud Functions. I've, got my hands dirty, dug in super deep. And then after being in it deep for a while, I'm like, yo, this ain't it. This ain't the thing that's going to change anything. Not at a grand scale. It's going to be useful because it's a continuation of something that was already useful. Managed services have been a thing before we start calling it serverless. So it's just a continuation of that. So I think now it's more of formalizing the ideas around adopting managed services, and maybe even a software development style that may be event driven, but it isn't a fundamental set of new concepts that people are just going to be taken aback by. So I just really didn't know where it was going until I got my hands dirty. And I'm now taking a position that it's good. It's here. I'm glad we're talking about it, but this ain't the paradigm shift that people were looking for.
It's not the magic bullet going to solve all your problems. It's not the multi-cloud.
No, it is definitely not the multi-cloud magic bullet, but it is one way of working that allows you to leverage technology, have that mindset first, buy versus build. In a serverless world, it's pretty clear. You're going to try to buy as much as you can and build as little as you can. And then there's all kind of avenues you can go with that. But that's been a discussion we've had for a very long time, going back to mainframe days. So I appreciate it, but I am now of an opinion that I'm going to keep it on my radar, but it's not the game changer I thought it was going to be.
That makes sense. So a couple personal questions just to wrap things up. One, what advice do you have for a young engineer who's, out of school, fresh out of school, maybe in Portland? What advice do you have for like a young Kelsey Hightower at this point in your career?
Man, I mean, the biggest advice I think is it doesn't matter. And the context there is like, you can talk about Docker versus Rocket. You can talk about Jenkins versus Bamboo for CI/CD. It just doesn't matter, man. The real goal really is to take that technology and is push it as far as you can to your use case. Take input from various blog posts and other experts in the field, but it's just input. Pick one thing. More than likely, you're going to make it work. Like, what car should you buy? Honestly, if your main goal is to get from point A to point B, it probably doesn't matter what car you actually buy. You can going to get from point A to point B. And the other factors that push you in a certain direction, make sure that those are super clear, right? If you want to focus on maybe green, then maybe you need to look at the way certain cars are made, not just the fact that it's an electric car versus a gasoline car. There's a lot that goes into that. So I think younger Kelsey would have benefited a lot from understanding what that meant. And that way I would have avoided a lot of decision paralysis and changing things for the sake of changing versus the sake of benefiting and moving forward.
No, that makes sense. Really looking at how you make your decisions. And then last question for you, for folks who are new to Kelsey Hightower and kind of your work and what you do, tell us a little bit more about something, outside of work that you're interested in.
Man, it's like so I always think about, so I've been debt free for a long time, like 20 years now. Got debt free very early in life and stayed that way. But this idea of minimalism, so outside my life, I kind of like, I have friends that I've known for 20 years. So I value those particular relationships, and just having the freedom to think the way I want, to be able to expose myself. I get to travel a lot as part of my work, but to really take time to be patient, right? Patient with the things that I read, patient with the relationships that I have, patient with my possessions. And so outside of work, I kind of like to just slow down a bit and enjoy life. It's not always about the hustle. It's not always about doing 25 different things. Sometimes it's like nice to slow down and just appreciate life for what it is. So for me, I think I like to think about the personal aspects, and that's just like, who am I and what are my thoughts and where do they come from? Do I really like certain things, or is it because I've been influenced to like certain things? So I spend a bunch of time making sure that I can just be myself. And that takes work. It takes the same amount of effort as it does in your day job. So when you're not at work, you almost have to spend the same amount of time defining and realizing who you are and being that person.
Yeah, no, it's great answer. It's a great answer, great advice. And I think it's opposite of a lot of what you hear day to day with, keep busy, just, push harder, work harder.
And
But
when you get
then,
enough money, you can afford not to do that.
yeah, no, it makes sense. Well, cool, man. Well, Kelsey, I appreciate you being, again, the first guest on my podcast. If yeah, anything to leave the crowd with, appreciate your time today.
Yeah, I think honestly, I'm really excited about a show where we can actually showcase, especially in this region. There are a lot of people doing a lot of cool things, and the funny thing is, there are a lot of people doing cool things that don't know that they're doing cool things. We meet a lot of companies where they believe that only in the valley or only somewhere else are people really innovating. They're just falling behind. And the truth is, it's not true. You have to share your stories, because turns out every company is doing something somewhat unique in their own way. Maybe how they use a particular tool in their vertical. Maybe no one else in their vertical is using the tool that way. And just sharing that idea is going to move that whole vertical forward. So share your stories regardless. Don't compare yourself to everyone else. Just kind of focus on what you're doing, and don't be afraid to let people know what that is.
I would appreciate it. Well, that concludes the first episode of the Digital Native Podcast. Kelsey, appreciate your time. Thanks again.
Awesome.